look at innovative thinking?
We look at innovation as the super skill that all of us can possess, and we can reframe it as creative problem solving. This is something that every employer sees as the most valuable thing in their employees, right? An employee who can solve problems as opposed to just coming up with why things won't work. And so it's really important for that reason. It's really important also because if we're going to solve the problems we have around us in society, we need to be able to come up with new ideas and new solutions for it. But unfortunately, most people tend to look at creativity as something you're born with or you're not. And I don't believe that that's the case. So in the book, we talk about creativity as a set of behaviors and skills that anyone can learn, anyone can put to practice to become a better innovator in society, and or even in their family or even in their workplace.
Yeah. It's the way we're getting through this. Either
Mhm.
we're just stumbling along, reacting to the last emotional roller coaster presented to us, or we're becoming a little bit more innovative in our ways of
Exactly.
reacting. So, okay, the first one's a perfect example of what you're talking about. Something that we can actually just do. It doesn't have anything to do with being creative or not. It's ask more questions.
Mhm.
Talk to me about all.
Exactly. So, our education systems train us to run to find answers, right? And good innovators don't jump to the first conclusion that they come to. They're good at holding the question, living the question even, and seeing that the first answer that comes up is not necessarily going to be the right answer. And so it's important to keep asking questions to uncover different elements of a problem. So you're right that it's something that anyone can do, and it's something that hardly anybody does. Which is to ask more questions. And this I think is, even if you're meeting someone for the first time, asking more questions to find out what makes that person tick, or if you're in any interaction at all, I think that the more questions you ask, the better off you'll be, or the more you'll understand.
Um, and do you ever notice that there's this tendency in many of us, I'm as guilty as anyone, to like listen to say what you're going to say next rather than
Yes,
listening to understand?
absolutely. Oh,
Oh,
100%.
that's the challenge right there,
Mhm.
right? Listening
Exactly.
to understand rather than listening to where you can jump in and get your turn.
Mhm. That's right.
Okay, the second one is living the problem. You mentioned that in this first one, but talk to us about living the problem.
Living the problem is all about immersing yourself in to understand what's going on in a particular situation. So and the reason that that's important is because so often we come up with ideas or solutions that are not actually what's needed on the ground. So there's the famous case of the NGO who wanted to help with sanitation in a village, and so built toilets for people that didn't have toilets before. And then they went back a year later, and they found that those toilets were people were still going to the bathroom outside in the woods, and the fancy toilets that were constructed were being used to store grain or chickens or whatever else people want to use it for, but they were still using the toilet the way they always had, right? Because they hadn't spent time in that community to understand how that community operates and how to design for that, right? So that's just one example. I think if you've lived a problem, if you've lived through what you're trying to fix, then you're by default in a better position to solve it. And if you haven't lived through it, then spending some time in that is really important. So one story we tell in the book from one of our first classes in Brazil, when we were working there, was that there was a group of young people who wanted to build a solution for pregnant women, and none of them were pregnant. So what they did was they built a kind of prosthetic, or just like they put cushions or something. They like mimicked the weight of a baby, and they tied it to their stomachs, and then spent a whole day like walking around the city, taking the metro, going shopping and so on, while carrying that weight to try to understand what it might be like to be a pregnant woman walking around the city. So they used the insights from that in the solution that they were developing, right? So that's just a very simple way in which you can think about it. But living the problem, is immersing yourself into what's going on so that you can understand it better.
Yeah, that goes along with I do a talk about how people find their purpose, and
Mhm.
that goes along with the second way that very commonly people live find their purpose, is that they have some very often tragic event that visits them, and then all of a sudden they know what it's like to
Yeah.
experience this thing, and then they are called forever in their life to help others either avoid that thing or get through it or whatever. But that is a lovely way to look at how you can turn obviously
Mhm.
terrifying things into a positive. But yeah, okay, so that's really important, and that helps us get around this going in and imposing solutions on
Mhm.
people without doing the work.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. The third one is reframing. Talk to us about reframing.
Reframing is one of my favorite ones. So, reframing is basically how do you look at a situation and come up with a reframe of it, a radically different way of looking at the same thing. So, I'll give you an example we use in the books. I was part of a workshop once where there was someone who was in the Ministry of Tourism of Mauritius, which for those who don't know, is a small island in the Indian Ocean, just off the coast of Africa. And they were trying to figure out how to improve Mauritius' standing as a tourism destination. And so a reframe in that case is to not look at Mauritius as a small, insignificant island in the Indian Ocean, but to look at Mauritius as the largest ocean state in the world. Right. So it's not then a small piece of land, but they're looking at the country as all the water between all the islands. And together that makes it a massive state, actually. Right. So it's not a small insignificant island. It's a huge ocean state. That's one way to look at it. Another story we tell in the book is when some of our students wanted to help street children in Kenya. They started off by asking, well, what can we do for these street children, who are poor, who are disadvantaged, and uneducated, and so on. And they started off by asking that question, and that's a question that millions of people have asked before. And then eventually, through the work of the program that they were in, they reframed it to say, not what can we do for you, but what can you do for us? And by changing the frame, they rather than look at all the things they need to give these young people, these street children, they looked at what skills do the street children already have that they can contribute to us in a way that allows them to earn money and pull themselves up out of poverty. So they eventually designed one thing street children know well is the streets. And so they designed a walking tour of downtown Nairobi where tourists can experience Nairobi through the eyes of the street children. And then that grew from just an idea to it's today the number one TripAdvisor experience that you can have in Kenya, in Nairobi, right? So that really enabled that to grow dramatically, and it was a completely different way of looking at it. And today, though some of those street children that were leading those tours have moved out of the slum, have bought apartments in middle-class neighborhoods, and are role models for their community as well, right? So those are just two ways of like how a reframe can help you come up with a different set of solutions.
No, I can see that being very helpful, and for that matter, living the problem a little bit better in families that are having trouble struggling with the communication with their teenagers and stuff. That reframing, you have to get clever, but I'm sure it can be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So the third one is associating. I mean, the
Mhm.
fourth one.